So you've created this traditional classroom mechanism in which you lose at least 25%, if not a third, of your class audience just with the basic premise of how you constructed the classroom.
Hello and welcome everybody to a whole new episode of Engati CX. I'm your host Rahul, and today you folks are in for a treat. So we've got an artificial intelligence augmented adaptive learning expert with us today on this show. And we have the pleasure of welcoming Kim Gordon to our interview series. So let's just begin with a quick introduction of Engati. Engati is the world's leading multilingual no-code chatbot platform available across 14 channels with 30,000 bots created across 186 countries in every domain and use case. Engati has also been recognized as a top platform by Inc.com, TechWorld, CIO, and many others. We run the Engati blog, the video channel, and the Engati CX podcast, of course, receiving upwards of 300,000 visitors annually. And now for our amazing guest. Kim William Gordon is the principal of Telementoris. With Telementoris, he has developed a learner-centric adaptive learning educational model, a model that provides a student-centric environment in which the learner can attain mastery without traditional classroom limitations or time constraints. Welcome to the 21st century of learning. So, Kim, shooting the first question to you, what are adaptive learning technologies and how will it revolutionize the current education pattern?
Absolutely. So what's really been interesting about adaptive learning technology, let's talk about its origin. Think of your relationship with Google or Facebook or any of those other engines that highly personalize and tailor information to you specifically as an individual. Mm-hmm. Now, all of those have been built on a model in which they have a marketing component, right? But if you take the concept of that personalization engine we've gotten accustomed to, and you unplug it, and you reconfigure it, and you turn it into a personalized learning system, now you really have the basis of what adaptive learning technology is all about. Let me pull up a couple of graphics here, and then I'll come right back to the screen.
Sure thing.
So, in a nutshell, what we are saying with adaptive learning technology is that we are going to replace the one teacher to many students model. And keep in mind, this model has been around for not forever, but a very long time, 100 to 150 years, depending on where you first put the marker. We want to re-engineer that so that the student has personalized attention utilizing the technologies that are widely available today, as I mentioned, in a variety of different social media systems. So if we do that, then what happens, bear with me while I'm pushing more buttons here, is that we move from the left side of the screen to the traditional brick and mortar classroom, which is one teacher to many students. And in the higher ed arena, it's still incredible to me. It's oftentimes in a lecture hall, one teacher to 80 or 90 students. I can't believe we still do that in the 21st century. And the center is your typical e-learning environment, which is really basically the same, right? It's one human teacher to many, many students. Right. And as we shift over to the right-hand side, we see that the human teacher is still very important. They're a very important element to this process. They learning technology teacher's assistant that is focused solely on that student within the shell of their own personalized learning environment. So the radicalization of how this technology is going to impact the classroom environment, of course, has a lot of domino effect as it moves throughout the entire educational system, not just higher ed, but all the way through the very beginning from the childhood relationship with instructors and teachers in the educational system, all the way through higher ed.
Right, right. That's beautifully put by you there. But coming to the main thing that we talk about here is about AI. And that's, I think, the future that's coming through, which ties in with this. So what role do you think that AI plays in adopting the learning-centric adaptive learning model?
Okay, so let me once again bring up another graphic. Mm-hmm. And this is a larger representation of what was on the right-hand side of the previous screen. the human educators, and notice that it has a parent around it. So it's no longer just one human educator with one student. It could be 20 or 30 of them scattered around the planet. That's the beauty of this advanced communication technologies. But the artificial intelligence is sitting there in the background, and it is tailoring the educational experience to that learner based on a wide variety of parameters. Those parameters can be what the student knows, what they need to know, how they learn, when they learn, their emotional state as they learn, some of the special qualifications that are necessary for that learner in order to be successful. The whole basis of utilizing an AI, which is basically just an augmentation, to the adaptive learning teacher's assistant is to tailor and personalize everything to that individual. There's no longer a lesson plan for a group of 30 students. There is a lesson plan for one student. It's pretty fascinating. If you really stop and think about how radically disruptive this is, a lot of people, quite honestly, don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's so fascinating that I think one thing that the education system did wrong was kind of had a universal approach of teaching to all the students, no matter how different they are from each other, right?
Right.
And that's why certain students are special at something, but they don't get noticed because, you know, that part of things is not really highlighted as such.
Well, the other issue that we've wrestled with, and there's plenty of, if anybody wants to do a literature review, there's been talk about this for 50 years, but if you throw one teacher in front of, let's say, 30 students, the typical bell curve occurs, right? You've got slower students, you've got faster students, and you've got students right down the middle. And the typical textbook is targeted to those every classroom, the slower students who probably could get it, get left behind. And then you've got the faster students who already know it, are bored out of their minds. So you've created this traditional classroom mechanism in which you lose at least 25%, if not a third, of your class audience just with the basic premise of how you constructed the classroom. So there are many educators that have been talking about this for years and how we need to correct it. And there was a very famous study in 1984 called the Bloom-Sigma 2 problem. I encourage the audience to go look that up. But Bloom actually constructed a solution to the problem in which became the fundamental basis for a lot that you're seeing occur with adaptive learning technology. We live in fascinating times, no doubt.
That's right. And this is bigger than we think, right? Because the exact education system, the way the child feels and, you know, the way the child is mentored when he's young is actually the kind of person he becomes in the future. So there are so many cases that people are slipped into depression because they didn't have a very rosy childhood, or maybe their school life was so difficult because of a universal approach towards things, because their special talents were not really highlighted. And, you know, this becomes a huge, it's a way bigger problem than we can think of.
Well, and in my dissertation, which ProQuest will have online hopefully this week, there is a great quote that one of the students I interviewed for the dissertation itself, and she said, if this technology would have been available, she would not have felt a failure throughout her educational career. Now, isn't that a shame? People should not feel a failure if they're trying to improve themselves. So I'm obviously quite an advocate of this technology. I'm going to bring up one more graphic before we move on with our questions, but this is indeed the issue that we've been faced with adaptive learning technology within the recent years. So there are many adaptive learning technology companies out there, and they've got some very robust and mature systems. The problem is that our educational community has been so mired in the traditional classroom that all they've done is slap the ALT as a bolt-on to those traditional classrooms, right, as opposed to the far right, where you completely re-engineer the classroom. The classroom disappears. Mm-hmm. The other thing that disappears are grades. We'll talk about that in a second. But this has been where we've stood to date regarding the use of adaptive learning technology. Now, we're starting to see some school systems actually utilize a completely different approach, but we're not there yet.
That's true. That's true. Hopefully
It's
soon.
fascinating. It's fascinating
It's
times.
very
Yeah.
fascinating. Yep. So moving on, and I think this is one of the most important questions we have for today is how can universities and schools incorporate the 21st century technologies into the current education system?
So we have two major components to the existing school system that have to be re-engineered.
Mhm.
And one is what I personally believe is the absurdity of the credit hour. And that dates back to the 1900s, in which it was a mechanism designed to try to figure out if you had 30, one of the methods is if you had 30 students sitting in a classroom, how long did they have to sit in that classroom before they got it?
Right.
They just dreamt these numbers up, right? So they dreamt up the credit hour system, which has very little to do by definition with what that student actually learned.
Right.
That's a major problem, not only for the higher ed, but for the education overall. They've got this model stuck in their head that somehow if you sit in a room long enough, you're going to learn something. And nobody would agree to that. And the
That's true.
second is grades. Grades are an issue because generally, if you look at the academic community and you ask them confidentially sometimes if they believe in the grading system, they will tell you no. Because the grades generally never reflect what that individual actually got in their head. And that's the beauty of adaptive learning technology is it will give you a representative model of what that student is capable of. And going back to Bloom as the basis of adaptive learning technology, Bloom said we should stop grades, we should check mastery.
Mm.
Did they get it? Are they a master of this topic? So some students may take 3 weeks to master Algebra 1. Other students may take 3 months. Who cares? As
Yeah.
long as they master it. So those two elements are going to really change the underpinnings of what universities think they do for a living, honestly. Hate to be a bearer of bad news, but we got to rethink all of it.
Yeah, wow, that makes me regret the fact that I was born earlier. You know, but yeah, I think it's very important for the future generation also because I think the world is moving in a fast pace and it's especially with the pandemic. What it taught us is that we can't predict the future and we have to be ready in all times and and be as equipped as possible. And obviously the current education system doesn't really align with what the future is looking like. So this would help actually bring out the specialities in certain people and make them professionals in the real sense, I think. Yeah. So
I concur. And the other thing that as you start really thinking this through, when does education end? And the truth of the matter is that we as a species, we learn every day of the week.
exactly.
And so the artificial constructs of, at this point, you've got a bachelor's degree, so you're done, doesn't make a lot of sense. So
Exactly.
we have to not only revisit the way that we deploy education, we have to come back and revisit the way that we actually measure what it is to be educated in the 21st century. And that's a
100.
tough question. That's going to take a lot of work.
100% agree with that. Because over here in India too, right, in engineering schools, they're actually teaching concepts from the 18th century. I mean, they are like, you don't really use them, and especially with times like
Exactly.
these. Yeah, like we are
Yeah.
using AI, we are using machine learning, we are using such advanced technologies. You can't be learning Newton's law. I mean, yeah, those are fundamentals, but then again, just teaching those and not taking you to the other side, I mean, that's a little dangerous.
I wholeheartedly agree. And back to the adaptive learning technology model, that teacher is no longer responsible for being the expert in the room. They need to know the concepts and the overall arching requirements of the subject. But the AI, the way I describe it is the AI doesn't care if it has to tell you something 100,000 times, 100,000 different ways. Doesn't care. Its concern is, do you understand it? So
Right.
what the role of the teachers begins to develop into is inspiration, excitement. I believe that we as a culture across the planet, it doesn't matter where you're at, have lost to a great degree, the love of simply learning. The
Agreed.
love of just putting new stuff in your head and trying to understand what this thing is all about that we happen to be in the middle of, called the universe. But I could wax on philosophically there.
So what you're telling me, Kim, is that the teachers will represent more of the human aspects about inspiration, about, the will to learning and all of that.
So I'm going to bring up with that, I'm going to bring up one more graphic here, actually two when we get to your last question. Modern technology. I tell people I love the 21st century. I can't wait until the 24th when things actually begin to work. All right. You see this graphic is called the Gordon model?
Right.
Okay. So what I've done as a result of the dissertation is I've taken that personalized learning environment and I said, what we really need to be thinking of is how do we take this model and expand it utilizing 21st century technologies? In many ways, let's prepare for the 22nd.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not going to go through each and every one of these boxes, but you can see over here in the left-hand side, there are a whole host of subject matter experts that are available on demand to assist that learner in understanding the concept or maybe even creating new conceptual models. And some of those are humans and some of those are AI. On the other side, here on the right-hand side, that you see that I've constructed what I call the collaboration universe. Wouldn't it be great if a student got engaged in a particular field of study and discovered that there was 100 other people around the planet who were figuring out the same thing? That kind of collaboration is absolutely critical, I believe, as we move into the 21st century. And that's another failure of the traditional education model, is it was myopically focused on the individual's success, had nothing to do with collaboration. And as you know, as we move into, students are suddenly rudely awakened with the fact that they have to work with other people. And it's incredibly important that we make sure that how do I want to describe it? That philosophy of collaboration and group growth is embedded into each and every student. We're not individuals on this planet. We are a species and we need to start acting like one.
That's so true. And I cannot, focus more on how important collaboration is when it comes to learning. Because so me as an engineering student, like I could take my example. I had a tough time learning math. I'm horrible at math, but
Yep.
Eventually, like when we used to sit in groups and try to learn the same concept with friends, it got way easier, right? And it was like magic.
Right. Because you could kick around ideas.
Correct.
Your mind would go off elsewhere. And, let's face it, our brains are really, really good if we allow ourselves to be distracted and the back of our brain is processing stuff. And then you come back around and go, oh, I get it now.
Exactly.
And we've got to re-engineer that into the way we learn, because I think that's what we're good at. We're a very creative, intelligent, cooperative species. Let's leverage that.
That's
and
true.
So hopefully adaptive learning technology will get us closer.
For sure, for sure. So talking about something we do now, Kim, is how do you think that we can use conversational automation tools like chatbots to increase classroom engagement, and also will it contribute to the replacement of the current one-to-many learning approach?
Well, and actually I built a graphic for you for that. So let me share the screen one more time.
Right.
And it is based on the previous graphic. But you can see in this model that the relationship between the learner and the AL teacher's assistant is facilitated to a great extent by a number of communication technologies, including chatbots. That's
Right.
where I see a chatbot. I also see it on the subject matter educational side, where chatbots are continually communicating not only with the learner, but with the human educator, giving them hints on some of the things that this particular learner might need in terms of inspiration or conceptual development or idealization, whatever that may be. And then certainly chatbots can be helping facilitate the collaboration universe, and also what I call the socialization component, where we're developing a atmosphere of cooperation, cultural sensitivity, a due diligence for civic responsibilities, critical thinking, media literacy, information literacy, all of those kind of elements that I think are absolutely necessary to be a successful citizen of the global world. So yes, chatbots are certainly an absolutely powerful component as we move forward in our educational systems, because they'll facilitate the conversation between us and the AI. I see it working that way.
That's true. And it's amazing how you found so many exclusively, in fact, very interesting use cases for chatbots, because I haven't myself thought about it that way. And it's pretty dynamic also, right? There are like multiple uses and it all combines together, and it gives a nice learning experience to the student. And I think that's amazing that you've coined that way.
Because I'm imagining forward, let's say 20 years from now, when this technology is persuasive, and I'm convinced it will be, I can see students naming their AI or naming their chatbots. It's their education friend. I can see that. That's another thing we do, is we make friends of everything, hopefully.
That's an amazing way to think about. Wow, Kim, this has been an amazing interview. You've just opened my eyes towards the possibilities with conversational intelligence, AI, and the education system itself. But one last thing before we close, is there anything you would like to leave our audience with, any soundboard, any ideas you'd like to throw out there?
Well, yeah, actually, very simply, we are at the very beginning of trying to figure out what we have on our hands in terms of the utilization of AI in education. And so I would encourage the audience, if you want to chat about it, I'd love to talk, because I don't have any answers. I'm not even going to pretend I have all of them. I don't have any answers. I'm just throwing stuff up against the wall and trying to wrap my mind around what it is that this actually implies long term. So I would love to be in conversation with anyone out there. Find me on LinkedIn. It's simply Kim William Gordon, and let's engage. Let's redefine what education is as we move forward.
You heard that, ladies and gentlemen. Kim Gordon for you. Reach out to him. So many special ideas there. He has so much insight and value for everybody. So go ahead and connect with him, and that's going to be amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kim, for giving us your time. Your insights were really, really valuable, and I know our audience is going to have a great time watching this interview.
I hope so. Let me know how it goes.
For sure. And we'll be back with a new episode with a brand new expert soon. So stay tuned, and we'll be see you around for the next one. Thank you.